Welcome everyone to the 2021 release day. My name is Jack Dubinsky. I'm the Aquarium Director here at the Maria Mitchell Association. The Maria Mitchell Aquarium is a seasonal aquarium. We catch virtually all of our animals in April, May, June, July, and August, and release most of them back into the ocean where they came from, and keep only a select few throughout the year. And today we're going to be releasing basically all of our display animals, and they're going to go home. And over the summer we've been feeding them all sorts of live food and things, so their hunting skills will be nice and sharp, so they'll have a nice life when they return back to the ocean. Thanks so much, Jasmine. This is Jasmine, one of my fabulous aquarium interns.
Hi.
And Jasmine is super helpful at the aquarium. She was helping run programs, give tours, mentor and manage our high school interns and volunteers, and basically do all of the aquarium husbandry and curation that I do at the aquarium as well. And I'm really excited to have Jasmine back for a month in September and October to help out with all sorts of fun things.
Yeah, so for release day, I'm going to be catching all the fish from inside the tanks and putting them into their buckets for Jack to release them all. I also helped feed the fish and clean their tanks to make it all pretty for you guys. I'll be here through October to help take care of our tropicals that will be here throughout the winter until next season. And in the Natural Science Museum, I'm getting that ready for the public again at the end of the month.
Sorry if I kicked you, Jasmine.
I'm out.
I might be able to catch the sea robin if you want to do that real quick.
One second. There you go.
There you go!
Oh, nice.
Alright, I'm gonna put it out on that side so I don't get splashed too much. Was that the tautog or was that the bass?
Tautog.
Yeah, I seemed a little too relaxed to be a bass. The first animal we're going to release today are our tautogs. Tautogs are really funny fish. They're kind of like the laziest fish in our area. They spend all day slouching around, especially in our tanks. They're always slouching on their side, and guests are always telling me, Jack, you have a dead fish in your tank. But it's just the tautogs being lazy and not super fun to look at. And it turns out people actually really like to eat tautogs. You may have seen them on the menus or in the fish markets as blackfish, but it turns out they're so lazy and oblivious that it's difficult to catch them by using a lure or with bait. So one of the best ways to go catch them is to go scuba diving. And there's a bunch of wrecks around Nantucket. And if you want to bring home a tautog for dinner, all you need is your scuba gear and a mesh bag, and that's it. And you dive down, and there's these big shipwrecks underwater. You take a mussel off the side of the boat and smash it open, and these huge big tautogs will come and feed right out of your hand. And if you want to take one home for dinner, all you need to do is open up your mesh bag, and they are so honestly just lazy and sometimes stupid that you can just gently grab this enormous fish with your hand and gently stick it into the mesh bag and seal it up. And they start off their life in the eelgrass, where they use it as a nursery habitat before moving on to rocky areas like the jetties and the shipwrecks around Nantucket when they get older. The next animal we're going to release is our black sea bass. Black sea bass are sequential hermaphrodites, so they're all born as females and made as females for the majority of their lives, and the biggest ones transition into males and made as males for the remainder of their life. People love to eat black sea bass. They are nice and sweet, and people love to go fishing for them, particularly around shipwrecks and jetties where they love to hang out. But they use Nantucket's eelgrass beds to hang out for the first year or so of their lives, where they're nice and safe from bigger predators. The next animals we're going to release are some of our flounders. We have both a little summer flounder, and the larger one in the bucket is the window pane flounder. The summer flounders are one of the most popular eating fish on Nantucket. You may have seen them on the menus or in the fish markets as fluke. They get really big and they're really, really yummy. And then the window pane flounders, I believe, are also eaten to some extent as well. But flounders in general are really cool. They're flat fish that swim on their sides. But what's interesting about flounder is that they don't always swim like that. When they're born, they look just like any other fish. When they're about this big, they have an eye on either side of their head and swim upright like any other fish does. And after a few weeks of eating delicious plankton, one of their eyes literally migrates to the other side of their head, and then they swim flat and descend to the ocean floor and live as flatfish for the rest of their lives. The two most common species of flounders on Nantucket are the summer flounder. We say it's a right-handed species with the eye on the right and the mouth on the left, and the winter flounder with the eyes on the left and the mouth on the right. And the difference between the two species, of course, is that when the summer flounder is developing, the right eye migrates to the left side and they swim on their right, and the winter flounder, the left eye migrates to the right side and they swim on their left, which is why the mouths are on different sides of them. And flounders can change the color of their skin to match their environment to help them camouflage, and that makes them excellent ambush predators. So they hang out in the sand and wait for prey, like little fish and shrimp, to come to them. They leap out of the sand. They have a huge distendable jaw that creates a huge suction force when it opens, and they suck their prey in whole and dive back down into the sand and digest them. There goes the window pane. This one's not eating size yet, but we'll see if eating size. Let's take a look at our horseshoe crab. All right, here he is. This is our Atlantic horseshoe crab. This one is a boy, and you can tell because the males will have these little hook shapes on their front legs, and the females will just have another pair of pincers. More anatomy stuff here. This hairy hole in the middle is his mouth, and these are his gills. This is called the telson. It looks sharp, but it doesn't sting. It's completely harmless. It's more of a tool to help him flip over if he gets washed ashore by a wave or something like that. Horseshoe crabs have several eyes. The biggest ones are out on the top here, called compound eyes. They also have two little eyes on the front that help them detect UV radiation. They also have several more eyes on the underside as well. Horseshoe crabs are not only not crabs, but they're not even crustaceans. They actually belong to a group called the Cheliceratta. Cheliceratta includes things like spiders, scorpions, sea spiders, and horseshoe crabs. And the one big distinguishing feature of the chelicerates is the presence. You guys may know that spiders and scorpions have two little fangs in front of their mouth. For the horseshoe crab, this is his mouth, and these two little claws here are his little fangs in front of his mouth. So that's why horseshoe crabs are technically more closely related to spiders and scorpions than they are to true crabs and lobsters and crustaceans. These guys are also really cool. They've been around for about 450 million years, which is many, many, many millions of years before dinosaurs. And a cool legacy of how ancient they are is the way they reproduce. These guys will crawl up to the beaches during the spring, and they time their spawning with the lunar cycles. So they come out during the full and new moons only, when the tides, or the highest tides, are the highest. And the females, come out, lay their eggs in the sand, the males fertilize them, and then they both go back into the water. And while there's all sorts of animals that eat those eggs today, 450 million years ago, that was a brilliant breeding strategy because not only were there not dinosaurs, but depending on who you ask, there were no land carnivores 450 million years ago at all. They all still lived in the ocean at that time. And so what they were doing 450 million years ago is literally getting their eggs as far away from the ocean as possible because the eggs were safest on land because there was nothing on land to eat the horseshoe crab eggs. All the predators were still in the ocean. There he goes. This is one of our favorite species of crabs on Nantucket. People love spiders and love crabs, so the combination of both is just excellent. Spider crabs are also known as decorator crabs because they will snip off pieces of seaweed and stick it on their back to help them camouflage with their environment. So you guys can see all of this algae all over him. Helps him camouflage with our algae-covered rocks in the tank. And so in the wild, they are extremely good at camouflage, especially the baby spider crabs. We find them with like manes and mohawks of seaweed and debris on their back. They're very cute. We have discovered, though, in captivity, sometimes they are not so smart. We've had spider crabs in tanks with yellow sponges, and they snip off pieces of sponge and stick it on their back, and it looks like they have ridiculous yellow polka dots. And then one of my favorite spider crab stories was from 5 years ago. Our circle tank here malfunctioned on a hot summer day. The chiller broke down, and the temperature in the tank blasted up to 86 degrees. And we were freaking out because it's supposed to be in the 60s. And we couldn't fix the chiller, and we were running around scrambling. So what we ended up doing was throwing a bunch of frozen Pepsi bottles in the tank, like ice cubes, to help keep the temperature down while we were trying to fix the chiller. And we had a spider crab in the tank at the time. He was about this big. And he was so convinced that he needed to camouflage with the Pepsi bottles that he climbed up to the highest rock in the tank, grabbed the Pepsi bottle, dragged it down, ripped off the Pepsi label, and stuck it on his back, and was walking with the Pepsi label trailing off of him for the rest of the afternoon, camouflaging with the Pepsi bottles. Was he hidden? Not really. But in my opinion, he gets an A for effort for trying. And this is just about as big as spider crabs get. Or at least our species, the common spider crabs. They do have cousins in the Pacific Ocean. The Japanese spider crabs can get 13 feet from claw to claw. And despite having such long appendages, their carapace only gets about this big around. So they have, basically the proportions of an enormous deep sea daddy long legs. But these guys are very common in Nantucket. They live in the eelgrass where they're little scavengers. They eat mostly dead stuff and debris and things like that. And so they help keep the water clean. And as you can see, the claws are pretty small in comparison to the size of the body. So they're typically not responsible for any pinches around the island. And they're just cute, fuzzy, little cuddly crabs. And we love them. This is our American eel. American eels are really cool. They have kind of like the opposite life cycle as a salmon. So they're born in saltwater, and then they ride the currents up to the rivers and streams of New England, and then slither up the streams and grow up in freshwater and return back to saltwater to breed. And they usually breed in the Sargasso Sea, which is basically the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that big gyre circling around. And what's interesting, though, about American eels, people find them in ponds and lakes. And, people are asking, how does an animal born in the ocean end up in a lake, right? So apparently, on dark, stormy nights, these big, 2-foot-long American eels will slither out of rivers and streams over the wet soil and find ponds and lakes if they're looking for more food. And they love to eat insects and insect larvae. And then when they're ready to breed, they'll wait for another storm and slither back into the stream and then ride the stream or river back into the ocean to breed. Around here, they'll eat little invertebrates and like shrimp and things like that, fish sometimes as well. Or if anything's dead and tasty on the ocean floor, they'll eat that too. Striped Cusk-eels are a really interesting fish as well. Even though they are called striped Cusk-eels and are slimy, they are not true eels. But just like our American eel, they are nocturnal scavengers. They live buried in the sand by day and come out at night to scavenge, and they use those little tendrils to help them find food. My favorite fun fact about striped cusk-eels is their breeding is really interesting. In June, the males start to develop this huge hump on their head, and they use it as like a little drum to attract females. And every once in a while, usually in August, I get someone coming into the gift shop at the aquarium asking me why they can't sleep on their yacht. And it's because in August is a chorus of tens of thousands of male cusk-eels drumming on that little bulge on their head. I do a pretty good striped cusk-eel mating call impression. It sounds like this. And if you imagine trying to sleep on your boat in the lower deck, and there's thousands of them making that sound, can be rather unpleasant. But usually by the end of August, they're all done with their breeding. These guys might go right in the sand. We'll see. Well, he'll figure it out, I think. We'll see. Oh, there he goes. These are our striped killifish. They are one of the most abundant inshore fishes on Nantucket. If you've been to any of our harbor beaches around Nantucket, they are swimming right up against the waterline, and people just kind of brush them off. Oh, those are minnows. But they are actually really interesting animals. They live in the intertidal, which is really rare for a fish, actually, especially without the tide pools on Nantucket. And their objective is to eat all the little sand fleas living in the rack line on the beaches. And so they wait for the tide to come up to the rack line, and those little striped killifish will eat all the little sand fleas. But sometimes they get so caught up with eating that the tide leaves them stranded in little kind of tide pools on the beach. But not to worry, because striped killifish are extremely well adapted to the intertidal beach environment. They can survive out of water for 30 to 45 minutes, but probably their coolest adaptation, if they're stuck in a tide pool, they are really smart. And as a little school, they'll vigorously swim around in a circle trying to find a little water escape back to the ocean. And if they can't find one, they will literally just hop out of the tide pool and flop over the sand back into the ocean. And there was a really neat study done recently that found that around 95% of the time, these striped killifish will jump out at the correct side of the tide pool such that their trip over the sand back to the ocean is the shortest. So they're really neat little fish, and they're really the only fish on Nantucket that have access to the sand fleas on the beach because of those cool adaptations. There's already killifish in the water swimming around us. These guys go right back with their friends. And this little guy is called a spot. They're actually very rare on Nantucket. This was one of the only individuals that the Maria Mitchell Association has caught on Nantucket ever. They're very common in the Chesapeake and further south off of the Carolinas, where they are a popular sport fish. And this one we found in May in our eelgrass beds while we were seining and collecting for the aquarium. We're going to release him now when the water's nice and warm, so he'll enjoy that, and hopefully he makes it further down south before the winter comes. This is our northern pufferfish. And the northern puffers are really cool. This is just about as big as they get around here. They are, puffer fish. This one would probably puff up to the size of like a volleyball or something, but it's actually a pretty effective defense mechanism. A lot of fish in the ocean are suction feeders, so they gulp their prey in whole. They don't take bites. So if the prey item is too big to fit in their mouth, they can't eat it. And that's when the puffing of the pufferfish comes in handy. Northern puffers are native to Nantucket and actually are quite common. They live in the eelgrass beds and they're usually born in July. And so we see the little itty bitty baby northern puffers all summer. And they love to eat crustaceans and mollusks. They actually have a really strong jaw, so they can crush right through the exoskeletons of crabs and shrimp and things like that. And yeah, they're really, really cool fish. Live in our eelgrass beds. There he goes. This is our northern sea robin. Sea robins are really cool for a variety of reasons. They get their name for their big wing-like pectoral fins they use to glide around on the bottom of the ocean, and they are excellent bottom feeders. Those wing-like pectoral fins, if you look closely, just like all fish fins, have little spines or fin rays in them. And in sea robins, the first 3 fin rays in those pectoral fins on the front of it are completely detached from the rest of the fin, and they can operate them independently like little feelers. And even though they look like legs, they don't really use them for locomotion. They use them more to smell and taste little critters in the sand. So it's like if you have noses on your fingers or something, they're digging through the sand looking for the scent and smell and taste of worms and sand shrimp, maybe little baby flounders and other bottom feeding fish. People usually catch sea robins when they're going after flounder. And while they are not quite as edible as flounder, some people around here do eat them. You can use the meat in fish tacos and things like that. And what's also fun is when you're fishing for them and get one on a hook, they make a weird croaking sound, and scientists aren't 100% sure why they do that, but suspect it's involved in mating and copulation. Alrighty, now we're gonna release some of our clams. We have 2 species today. We have the soft shell clam, which is a little bit longer. People like to eat those. You may see them in the menus as steamers or fried clams. And soft shell clams get their name because their shell is so brittle that someone could just crush the shell right in their hand. And then we have the other species, which is our hard shell clam, which gets its name because it's very difficult to break the shell. Even seagulls have trouble breaking them, so they have to fly up 50 feet and drop them onto rocks or a pier to break them open to eat them. But both species live both in the intertidal and subtidal bays around Nantucket, and they both have a siphon that they use to stick up. The actual clam is living under the sand, and the siphon sticks up just enough so it can filter feed and suck water in, eat all the little plankton and debris in the water, and spit the clean water back out through that one siphon. They're really, really important animals around here and help us clean the water.
Enjoy, friends.
So these are some of our Atlantic bay scallops. These are also really important animals to Nantucket. They're one of the highest value commercially fished marine organisms around Nantucket. The part people like to eat is the abductor muscle that opens and closes the shell. If you look closely, all of the little blue dots in the shell are their eyes. Even though they have several dozen eyes, they have terrible vision. They're more like photoreceptors, so they can't really see images like we can. So if you swim right up to a bay scallop, it usually will not, react to your presence. But if you cast a shadow over it, it will close right up in defense. Scallops are filter feeders as well, just like clams are. And adult bay scallops, I believe, can filter on the order of 40 gallons of water every day. So if you imagine the millions of bay scallops out there in our harbors, they really have a substantial impact on water quality, which is especially important because if we have algal blooms, that can destroy our eelgrass beds, which are important for protecting our coastlines and important habitat for a variety of organisms, including the bay scallops. So their contribution to water quality is very important.
Feeding frenzy today.
Awesome, this is our little blue crab. Blue crabs are one of the tastiest crabs on the east coast of the United States. In fact, most of the crab cakes you'll eat on the east coast are made from the meat of blue crabs. If you look carefully, their hind legs are flattened into a flat sort of paddle shape, and they can use them to literally swim in the water column. Blue crabs are probably one of the most aggressive crabs on Nantucket. If you guys are walking around near the salt marshes and get pinched, I almost guarantee it's a blue crab responsible. But fortunately, they're not very common on Nantucket's most popular beaches, so not really something you need to worry about in general. This is our naked goby, and naked gobies are really cute with their big heads and their long tapering tails. They love to live in shells and little rocks and debris, and they're little ambush predators, so they wait for itty bitty little shrimp and things to come by, and they leap out of their shell, gulp their prey in whole, and go back into their shell to hang out. They are extremely proficient at changing their gender. A lot of gobies can switch from one gender to the next. at their will. And it's actually a really interesting adaptation. There are a lot of papers out there that have calculated that since gobies are usually not very abundant where they're native, usually it takes a lot of time to go around and find a mate. So yeah, let's say a male is looking for a mate and finds another male. Scientists have calculated that for some species, on average, it takes less calories to switch gender than it is to go out and find another mate. So it's like a really cool sort of energy saving adaptation oftentimes in those fishes. They're really common around Nantucket, and they live in the eelgrass. They live in like kind of rocky areas as well. Yeah, they're common food for bottom feeders, so like scup like to eat them. Little sea robins will eat them as well and things like that. Yeah. My shadow's pointing to them. This is our little black-fingered mud crab. And even though this one looks itty-bitty, this is actually an adult black-fingered mud crab. They actually don't get much bigger than that. They're really important predators actually in our eelgrass habitats. They love to eat baby shellfish, so they'll eat baby bay scallops, hard-shell clams, and soft-shell clams, but they'll also eat debris and worms and things like that as well. They're, focusing on hiding from people, so you don't have to worry about the black-fingered mud crabs pinching you ever, but they are very abundant in our eelgrass beds. So this is our scup. You may also have seen them in the supermarkets or fish markets as porgy, and they are extremely abundant on Nantucket. People love fishing for them off of the town pier. They are edible. They're a little bony, but especially like local Nantucketers, you'll see them sometimes off the town pier, catch 5, 6, 10 scup, for dinner, and bring them home, and they're prepared, grilled or sauteed or baked whole usually, or you can make them into fish tacos. Scup are really interesting fish too. They have teeth in their mouth to chew their food, and then they swallow it, and then they have another array of teeth in their throat called the pharyngeal mill that cuts up the food even more before it reaches the stomach. And they are kind of scavengers. They'll eat silversides and herring and things like that. They love to go up to the floating dock and eat all the little shore shrimp that are hanging out right on the floating dock and in the eelgrass beds as well. And the scups are one of the many species on Nantucket that utilizes our eelgrass beds as a nursery habitat. So the little baby scups are hanging out in the eelgrass beds in the summer, and then once they get a little bigger, they move to other places like the town pier, the jetties, shipwrecks. They're common. Places with more like habitat and caves and things like that for them. This is our really cute short-horned sculpin. They get substantially larger than this, and sculpins are also like little ambush predators. They hang out in caves and rocks and are pretty well camouflaged in those environments, and they wait for little shrimp and fish to come up to them, and they leap out and gulp their prey in whole and go back into their little cave and hide and digest them. And they're really common in our eelgrass beds, especially living amongst like the dead whelk shells and quahog shells and things like that. But once they get larger, they go to other places and often offshore when they're adults. But the little babies are all over the eelgrass beds and the jetties and things like that. If you want to see any of them snorkeling, just go to our eelgrass beds and lift up all of the broken shells, and you're sure to find one. So these are our northern pipefish. They are extremely abundant in our eelgrass beds, and as you can tell, they would be perfectly camouflaged amongst the eelgrass. They literally wind up around it sometimes. Sometimes if they're feeling like it, they'll even pretend to wave around like the eelgrass is around them. So you can see they have a teeny tiny itty bitty little mouth, and they suction feed tiny little organisms in the water, mostly zooplankton. They're in the cygnathid family along with seahorses. And just like seahorses, the pipefish, it's the males that get pregnant and give birth to the offspring instead of the females. When the females are ready to reproduce, they swim up to the males and they do a little ritual dance. They wrap around each other like vines. And if the male decides that she's a good enough dancer, he will accept her eggs and she will swim away. And the male will be pregnant all alone for about a week and a half or so before giving birth to the live baby pipefish. So this is our knobbed whelk. We also have another large whelk species on Nantucket called the channeled whelk. And the knobbed whelks have these dull knobs on the sides of the shell. And the channeled whelks, instead of the knobs, have a deep groove going down the spire. Both the knobbed whelk and the channeled whelk are vicious carnivores. They spend all day slithering under the sand, hunting mostly soft shell clams. And they sneak up to the live clams, stick the tapering end of their shell into the two shells of the clam, pivot to one side to crack the clam open, and they use this nasty muscle called a radula. It's like a toothed tongue. It looks like a finger with a bunch of hooks and spines coming out of it, and they rasp and scrape all of the clam meat out of the shell and eat the clam alive. So if you were born as a clam, the whelks would probably be your worst nightmare. People love to eat whelks, actually, not so much in the United States, but there's actually a very lucrative fishery for them in Nantucket Sound. You'll almost never see whelk offered on any of our menus or at any of the fish markets around Nantucket, because I guess people just don't really have a taste for it around here. Enjoy, friend. This is our last remaining Atlantic silverside. We do stock our tanks with them regularly for the other fish to eat, so they keep up their hunting skills, so when we release them, they'll be able to hunt these silversides in the wild. Atlantic silversides are one of the most important fishes on Nantucket. They form huge schools and are very important food for all of the big game fish around Nantucket, like bluefish, striped bass, bonito. Gray seals love to eat them as well. Silversides are a really cool example of a common phenomenon in the ocean called countershading, in which the fish are camouflaged in different ways from different directions. So, for example, with the Atlantic silverside, if you look down on them, they are pale in color, so it's very difficult for, say, a seagull or some sort of bird or something attacking from above to see them with the sand below them. Let's say a striped bass is coming at them from the side. Their silvery bands on their side reflect the sunlight and create a strobe light effect when there's a huge school of them, making it difficult for the striper or the other predatory fishes to track which direction they're swimming in. And on the bottom, the Atlantic silversides are pale in color, or kind of like bright in color. So a flounder or a sea robin looking up at them has trouble seeing them with the blue sky or the white clouds above. So they're camouflaged in all these different ways. But despite that, all sorts of fish love to eat them around Nantucket. But their camouflage makes it so a select few of them get to survive until the next year, where they can breed and replenish their losses. This is our baby smooth dogfish, and smooth dogfishes are a type of hound shark. They're excellent bottom feeders, and they love to eat little sand shrimps and flounders and things like that. They actually kind of cheat the entire system, and smooth dogfish, just like all sharks, skates, and rays, have a sixth sense. They have an array of electroreceptors on their nose and on their head called the ampullae of Lorenzini that detect electric fields in the water. You know, let's say there's a little sand shrimp living 4 inches under the sand, completely inaccessible to a flounder or a sea robin or a scup or anything like that. But as it turns out, every time that little tiny shrimp's little tiny heart beats, the electric field around the animal fluctuates just the slightest bit for those extremely sensitive ampullae on the shark to pick up the exact position of the heart of their prey, and the smooth dogfish can dig their nose into the sand and gobble up that little shrimp as if it can see it in plain sight. With shark conservation in mind, surfers and divers, you'll see some of them wearing little like electromagnetic bands around their wrists that stimulates the heartbeat of something really big. And even great white sharks are, you know, terrified of orca whales. So a shark will come by and detect that pseudo heartbeat and think that there's some huge, enormous predator in the area, and they'll flee in terror. And you don't have to hurt the shark. The shark doesn't even come near you, and happy ending for everyone. The smooth dogfish get usually about 4 or so feet long. They're completely harmless to humans. Not only are they terrified of us, but even if they wanted to bite us, it would be an extremely awkward interaction because their mouth is on their bottom instead of in front of them. So they'd have to swim like onto you. They don't have sharp teeth like, say, a great white does. Their teeth are fused into their jaw. We call them grinding plates, so they feel more like sandpaper than like a sharp tooth of any sort. So they're completely harmless, and they're probably the most abundant shark species on Nantucket. We also have sandbar sharks, which are pretty common, as well as the occasional white shark as well. This is our lion's mane jellyfish. This one is pretty small. The ones we see on Nantucket on average are usually 3 to 5 inches in bell diameter, although the lion's mane jellyfish is the largest plankton species in the world. The record individual washed up not too far from here in Boston Harbor, and that one was 5.5 feet in bell diameter, and the tentacles were 121 feet long, although they don't usually get that big around here. The anatomy of a sting is really interesting. So the tentacles are lined with stinging cells called cnidocytes, and if you were to look at a cnidocyte under a microscope, it would look kind of like a rectangular little cell, and at the top of the rectangle there is a little trigger called a cnidocyl, and when anything touches the tentacle, that cnidocyl is pressed down literally like a little lever, and a venom-filled harpoon is ejected from the cell into the prey item, and the harpoon is one, designed to pierce the skin of the prey, 2, deliver a usually neurotoxic concoction of venoms, and 3, has a barb on it, so once the harpoon goes into the skin, it does not come out again. So that anchors the prey to the tentacles. The rate at which those the nematocysts, the little venom-filled harpoons, are fired is one of the fastest known movements in the animal kingdom. Accelerates faster than a race car or a rocket ship or a bullet coming out of a gun. It's almost instantaneous, and we actually had to develop a special camera just to be able to film the extremely rapid nematocyst firing. If you guys have ever been stung by a jellyfish, you may have noticed if a tentacle was left on you, pulling it off feels kind of sticky. Tentacles actually do not have any adhesive properties whatsoever. They feel sticky because you're pulling out thousands of microscopic harpoons out of your skin as you're tearing the tentacle off of you. But the lion's mane jellies are not, life-threatening. Usually the stings are just kind of like a itchy rash for a few hours or so. So these guys are our comb jellies. This species in particular is called the sea walnut. Comb jellies are not jellyfish, not at all. They are actually more closely related to sea sponges than they are to true jellyfish. But the comb jellies are in their own phylum called Ctenophora, which means comb-bearing. And these guys move with 8 rows of little paddles, and they kind of move very deliberately forward. These guys have 2 lobes, and they move lobes first, and have 4 little oral arms that create a current of water right into their stomach. And they love to eat copepods and other sort of planktonic animals. When you see them under the right light, it looks like they're flashing rainbow colors. That is not bioluminescence. That is just the simple refraction of light off of their comb rows. The sea walnuts are bioluminescent. So if you go out to a beach and see them during the day, I would recommend going to that same beach or dock at night, and you can use a flashlight to find them and put them in your hand and turn the flashlight off, and if you poke them and move them around in your hand, they flash bright green down their comb rows, which is really cool. Some scientists are in hot debate over the purpose of bioluminescence. Some scientists think that bioluminescence is designed to scare or startle the predator. If you guys sat down for dinner and your food was glowing green, it would probably be substantially less appetizing. But some scientists think that the purpose of bioluminescence is instead to illuminate nearby prey options. So let's say a fish is going after prey at night and bumps into a comb jelly. The comb jelly flashes green, illuminating a tasty copepod to its right, and then maybe the fish will eat the copepod instead of the less nutritious comb jelly. But either way, it's a really cool adaptation that they have. And I should also mention that comb jellies, since they're not jellyfish, are completely harmless to humans. They do not have stinging tentacles or stinging cells at all at any part of their life, with the exception of one comb jelly species that eats true jellyfish and steals the stinging cells, but that species doesn't live on Nantucket anyway. But comb jellies are completely harmless to humans and a really important part of our ecology. They help keep all of our zooplankton communities in check and provide food for jellyfish and some shorebirds as well. So these are our Atlantic fiddler crabs. They get their name because the males have one enormous claw and one teeny tiny claw, and it makes it look like they're playing the fiddle or something. Fiddler crabs love to live around salt marshes, and they dig little holes in the sand, and they periodically migrate into the water to fill their gill bladders so they don't asphyxiate. So they like to live in like kind of wet sand, and they dig pretty deep down, so they're like living amongst the moist sand. Those little holes keep them safe from shorebirds and other predators on land that would love to eat them. In the water, they are important food for blue crabs and other predators in the salt marshes. And the males have that one enormous claw, and they use that to duel with other males, mostly ritualistically. Even though they're large claws, they very rarely actually do any damage to each other. They clank them like swords, and the winner gets to mate with the female, and the female follows the male into his den. Well, that's about it for our release day. Thank you guys so much for joining us today and for an amazing 2021 season. If you guys have any questions about the animals we talked about today or about the aquarium, feel free to email me. And my email is right here on the screen. Stay tuned. If you're on islands in the off season, feel free to get in touch with us if you want to do a private beach walk. Also stay tuned on our website. We're thinking about opening our Natural Science Museum for select dates this fall and winter. If you guys love what we do here at the Mariah Mitchell Association and want to get involved, we have volunteer opportunities, and you can donate to us to help us run these amazing programs and offer these really cool experiences as well. And yeah, thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your day.